Before the fame, before the tuxedo, there were 5 women who shaped Pierce Brosnan's heart and his soul. Some lifted him up, others left him shattered, but each left a mark that time couldn't erase. These aren't just love stories. They're the true, untold history of a man behind the legend. Cassandra Harris, the enchantress who changed his fate. When Pierce Brosnan met Cassandra Harris, his life was anything but glamorous. He was a working actor with modest roles and modest dreams. But then came Cassandra, a woman who carried herself like a star, even when she wasn't on camera. She had the beauty of old Hollywood and the soul of someone who had lived 1,000 lives. Pierce would later say, she was this beautiful magnolia spirit who seemed to glide across the room. They met at a party, and from the moment they spoke, it felt like something bigger than chance. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher, and Brosnan stepped into their world without hesitation. When they married in 1980, he didn't just become a husband, he became a father. And not long after, they had a son of their own, Pierce Brosnan. Cassandra was more than a wife. She was his creative partner, his muse, his anchor. They worked together, lived boldly, and built a family bound by more than blood. But behind the laughter, Cassandra carried a private wish. She believed Pierce was destined to become James Bond. She saw it before anyone else. Long before casting directors or producers even whispered his name, she told him, "You're going to be 007 one day. It's who you are." Then, life changed forever. In 1987, Cassandra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same disease that had taken her own mother. The next few years were a blur of hospital visits, prayers, and quiet heartbreak. Pierce was by her side through it all. The pain, the surgeries, the fear. He stayed. As he later said in a rare moment of public grief, "Watching someone you love slowly die changes you forever." Cassandra passed away in 1991, leaving behind a shattered family and a man broken in ways the public would never fully understand. Pierce later reflected, "She made me the man I am. Every role, every painting, every heartbeat, I owe her." And when he finally became James Bond in the mid-90s, it wasn't a victory. It was a bittersweet echo of a dream she never got to see come true. But in many ways, she never really left. Cassandra's spirit lives in Brosnan's work, in his resilience, and in the compassion he carries into every room. He often credits her with teaching him not just about love, but about grace, dignity, and purpose. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of their story. She didn't just change his fate, she became it, which leads us to the daughter who carried her fire and her fate. Charlotte Harris, the daughter bonded by love and loss. Charlotte Harris wasn't Pierce Brosnan's biological daughter, but that never mattered. When he married Cassandra, Charlotte was just a teenager reeling from the trauma of losing her father. Pierce didn't step in, he stepped up. He adopted both Charlotte and her brother Christopher, raising them as his own with nothing but love and dedication. He once said, "They were mine from the moment I met them. Blood never mattered." Charlotte was bright, warm, and full of life. Those close to her said she had Cassandra's strength and Pierce's heart. The bond between father and daughter only deepened after Cassandra's death. At just 19, Charlotte lost her mother, but Pierce never let her fall. He helped her grieve, helped her grow, and held the family together in the face of unimaginable pain. But fate has a cruel memory. Years later, Charlotte was diagnosed with the same ovarian cancer, that had taken her mother. It was a devastating moment of déjà vu for Brosnan, who had already lived this nightmare once. As she began her fight, he became her rock again, driving her to treatments, holding her hand through it all. He later revealed, "To watch her go through what her mother endured, it's a kind of helplessness no one should ever feel." Charlotte passed away in 2013 at just 41 years old. Brosnan was gutted. He once wrote, "Charlotte was my sunshine. She brought light into every room. Losing her felt like losing the world all over again." Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It reopened old wounds and carved new ones. The weight of losing both wife and daughter to the same disease would leave anyone broken. But for Pierce, it became a call to honor them through grief, activism, and quiet strength. He continues to speak openly about ovarian cancer, raising awareness and funds in their memory. And while the pain never leaves, he finds comfort in the idea that Cassandra and Charlotte are together, watching, guiding. He often said, "Tears, aren'tc famosos, I carry them with me every day, in my heart, in my soul, in everything I do." Charlotte's legacy is more than the heartbreak she left behind. She was a loving mother, a devoted sister, and a daughter who proved that love doesn't begin or end with DNA. It lives in the choices we make. And Pierce made the choice to love her completely, no matter the cost. From love born of fate to love defined by loss, next came the woman who brought him back to life. Keely Shea Smith, the North Star that lit his darkness. In the years following the loss of Cassandra and later Charlotte, Pierce Brosnan drifted through grief with a quiet strength. He worked, he fathered his children, but part of him was still navigating a kind of emotional space no one else could see. And then, like a calm in the storm, came Keely Shea Smith. They met in Mexico in 1994 at a beach party where everything felt easy and open. Keely wasn't part of the industry machinery. She was a journalist with a kind soul and grounded energy. Brosnan later described that meeting as something out of a dream. There was a kind of light around her, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. They talked until sunrise, and from that moment on, something shifted. What followed wasn't rushed or loud. Their love grew slowly, steadily, like something they were both carefully protecting. They dated for 7 years before marrying in 2001 in a quiet ceremony in Ireland. For Pierce, it wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new beginning. Keely helped him believe in life again, not just survival. Together, they built a family, welcoming 2 sons, Dylan and Paris. It was a second chance at fatherhood, but with the wisdom of everything he'd been through before. Keely supported his career, stood by him in loss, and never asked him to forget what came before. She knew the ghosts he carried. She embraced them too. Brosnan has often said that Keely saved him in more ways than she'll ever know. He calls her his North Star, a guiding light when everything else felt uncertain. And the world noticed. Over the years, they've become one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories, free of scandal, rooted in mutual respect, and full of quiet grace. Even in public, their bond feels unshakable. On anniversaries and red carpets, he speaks of her with the reverence of a man who knows how fragile happiness can be. "She has this strength I wouldn't be able to live without," he once told an interviewer. But Keely's greatest gift wasn't her love alone. It was the space she gave him to grieve, to heal, to remember. She never tried to replace Cassandra. Instead, she helped Pierce carry the memory forward, not as a burden, but as part of the man he became. And in every step he takes now, There's a thread that ties both women together, the one who shaped him and the one who saved him. Which brings us to the way Cassandra still lives, not just in memory, but in every role he's ever played since. The memory of Cassandra in every role. Even after decades have passed, Cassandra Harris never truly left Pierce Brosnan's side. Her presence, her belief in him, and her vision of what he could become are still stitched into every performance he gives, especially the one that changed his life forever, James Bond. It's impossible to separate his path to 007 from Cassandra's dream. Long before the tuxedo and Aston Martin, she told him plainly, "You are Bond. They just haven't seen it yet." And when she said it, she meant it, not as a compliment, but as a conviction. She saw something in him that he hadn't yet dared to believe. When she passed away in 1991, her voice didn't fade. In fact, it echoed louder than ever. Brosnan would go on to become James Bond just a few years later, debuting in GoldenEye in 1995. For the world, it was a triumph. For him, it was bittersweet beyond words. He once admitted, "When I finally got the role, I felt joy, but also a quiet kind of sorrow. I wished she could have been there." And that's the truth of it. Behind the charm, the action, the danger, there was grief. Cassandra's belief in him became a compass, and her absence became a kind of emotional fuel. Brosnan brought something to Bond that no one before him had: depth, vulnerability, a hint of sadness behind the eyes. That wasn't acting, that was real. Her memory also found its way into his art. A talented painter, Brosnan has created dozens of works over the years, many of which are tributes to Cassandra. Some feature her directly, others are more abstract, but all of them carry her spirit. In interviews, he rarely speaks of his art without mentioning her. "It's how I talk to her," he once said. He also became a quiet advocate for ovarian cancer awareness, honoring the legacy of both Cassandra and Charlotte. Though he doesn't shout about it, he shows up at events, fundraisers, and in personal donations. It's how he keeps their names alive, not through headlines, but through meaning. The most heartbreaking part? Cassandra's greatest wish, seeing him as Bond, was fulfilled only after her death. The irony is sharp, but the poetry is beautiful. Because in a way, she was right all along, and he never stopped walking the path she placed him on. Her fingerprints are on everything, on his strength, on his performances, and on the quiet sorrow he sometimes carries like a second shadow. Next, we meet the woman who never shared the screen with him, but helped shape it from behind. Beau St. Clair, the creative soulmate who became family. Beau St. Clair, the sister he never had. There are people who walk into your life not with fireworks, but with quiet certainty. People who don't just support your story, they help you write it. That was Beau St. Clair for Pierce Brosnan. She wasn't a lover or a relative, but she became something just as sacred. His creative soulmate. They met in the early 90s, introduced through the film world. What started as a professional connection evolved into a deep, enduring friendship that lasted more than 3 decades. Together, they co-founded Irish Dreamtime, a production company that allowed Brosnan to explore the kind of films he wasn't being offered as James Bond: intimate dramas, indie gems, personal stories. Movies like The Thomas Crown Affair, Evelyn, and The Matador wouldn't exist without Beau. She was the quiet force behind the scenes, the one who helped him take risks, both artistically and emotionally. Pierce often called her the sister I never had, and in interviews, He spoke of her with the same reverence he gave to the women who raised and shaped him. But like the others, Beau's chapter ended too soon. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same cruel disease that had already taken Cassandra and Charlotte. The irony was gutting. Another woman he loved, fighting the same silent killer. As she grew sicker, Pierce stood by her, this time not as a romantic partner or a father, but as a brother in arms. He once said, "We were dreamers, and we got to live those dreams. But in the end, the cancer was stronger than the dream." When she passed away in 2016, he delivered a eulogy that felt like a final scene in one of their films. He called her a beautiful woman in every way, and the grief in his voice was unmistakable. It wasn't just the loss of a friend. It was the end of an era, a part of his identity vanishing quietly into memory. What made her passing even more heartbreaking was the pattern it represented. Another woman he loved, another life ended by cancer, another goodbye without closure. But instead of crumbling, Brosnan folded the pain into his art, just like he always had. Beau's legacy lives on, not just in the films they made, but in the man Pierce became through knowing her. She taught him that family isn't always by blood, and that love comes in many forms. Some loud, some quiet, all unforgettable. And in the wake of these losses, Cassandra, Charlotte, Beau, comes a larger truth. These weren't isolated heartbreaks. They were lessons in love, shaped by tragedy. The women who taught love through tragedy. If there's a single thread running through Pierce Brosnan's life, it's this: the women he loved also taught him how to lose. And somehow, in that losing, he found strength. It began with Cassandra, who gave him his first real taste of family. She was more than just a wife. She was his mirror, his muse. When she died, she didn't just leave a void. She left a blueprint for the kind of man he would spend the rest of his life trying to become. One full of grace, love, and endurance. Then came Charlotte, the daughter he chose. Watching her battle the same disease as her mother felt like reliving a nightmare, but deeper, sharper. He wasn't just losing a child. He was losing another piece of Cassandra. And yet, he never ran from it. He stayed present. He stayed loving, even in the worst moments. And then there was Beau, his partner in creation. Her death closed the loop on a trio of loss that would crush most people. But Pierce didn't let it break him. He turned his pain into purpose, quietly becoming an advocate for cancer research, grief, awareness, and emotional honesty in a business that so often hides it. Through it all, one woman stood beside him, Keely. She didn't arrive to erase the past. She came to hold it with him. Her love wasn't a replacement, it was a restoration. She helped him believe that love wasn't cursed, that he could build again. And he did. Pierce once said, "Love is a constant evolution. It teaches, it bruises, and if you're lucky, it heals." And maybe that's what these women gave him, lessons in how to hold on and how to let go. How to celebrate the good without being destroyed by the bad. How to stand in the aftermath of grief and still reach for joy. What's remarkable is that he never let tragedy turn him bitter. Instead, it made him deeper, gentler, more human. In an industry obsessed with appearances, Pierce Brosnan's life is proof that the heart tells the better story. Every woman he loved, whether in life or in loss, left a different kind of mark. Cassandra gave him courage. Charlotte gave him empathy. Bo gave him creativity, and Keeley gave him peace. They didn't just shape his past, they shaped the soul of the man we know today. And now, with those lessons etched into every role, every painting, every word, he carries them forward into legacy. The Silent Women, Bond girls who captivated 007. While the world watched Pierce Brosnan transform into James Bond, few realized just how much the women around him helped shape the character and the man behind the tuxedo. They weren't the love stories of his real life, but on screen, they left a deep impression. In many ways, these Bond girls became a mirror to Brosnan's evolving identity, both as an actor and as a person walking through his own shadows. Take Isabella Scorupco, who played Natalia Simonova in GoldenEye. She was intelligent, sharp, and full of heart, the emotional anchor in Brosnan's explosive debut as 007. Their chemistry wasn't just scripted, it felt organic, and fans still talk about the humanity she brought to the role. She wasn't just another beautiful face, she was the kind of woman Bond could actually love. And maybe, in some ways, she reminded him of Cassandra. Then came Famke Janssen's Xenia Onatopp, a seductive assassin whose weapon of choice was strangulation during intimacy. Her performance was so extreme it was nearly surreal, but Brosnan's Bond never blinked. There was a coldness in his eyes that made audiences believe this man had seen too much, felt too much, and built walls to survive. By the time Terry Hatcher entered the picture in Tomorrow Never Dies, the emotional weight was heavier. Her character, Paris Carver, was a former lover of Bond's, one with history, regrets, and unfinished pain. The scenes between her and Brosnan were some of the most emotionally charged in the franchise. Years later, Terry admitted that working on the film was difficult, but Brosnan's grace made it bearable. That says a lot. Michelle Yeoh, now an Oscar-winning icon, played Wai Lin, Bond's equal in every way, fierce, independent, untouchable. Their partnership showed us something new. Bond didn't have to dominate. He could respect. And Brosnan played that with sincerity, never overshadowing her presence. He knew how to share the frame and the story. And then, in Die Another Day, came the double impact. Halle Berry as the unforgettable Jinx, and Rosamund Pike as the icy villain Miranda Frost. Together, they embodied the spectrum of Bond's world: desire and danger, seduction and betrayal. The film itself may have been loud and flashy, but Brosnan's Bond always felt like a man just one step away from heartbreak. What's striking is how these women, though fictional, reflected parts of Pierce's real life: strength, loss, complexity. And maybe that's why audiences believed him in the role so deeply. He didn't just play Bond. He carried the emotional cost of being Bond. But behind the performances, behind the sharp suits and action scenes, was a man still reckoning with his own private heartbreak. And as the cameras stopped rolling, another battle awaited, one that wasn't scripted and had no heroic escape. The man haunted, grief, estrangement, demons at home. Not all pain makes the headlines, and for Pierce Brosnan, some of the deepest scars were the ones the public barely saw, the kind that lived in quiet places, behind closed doors and sleepless nights. One of those wounds came from his adopted son, Christopher, the boy he raised as his own after marrying Cassandra. In the early years, they were inseparable. Brosnan treated him no differently than his biological children. But as Christopher grew older, life took darker turns. He struggled with substance abuse, slipping further into addiction, and pulling further away from the family that once held him close. Pierce tried everything: interventions, treatment, second chances. But sometimes, love can't fix what someone won't face. Eventually, he made a heartbreaking decision. He had to let go. He once said in an interview, "It's the most painful thing I've ever done, but I had to protect the rest of the family and myself." That kind of loss doesn't come with closure. Christopher is still alive, but the estrangement sits heavy on Brosnan's heart. It's not like losing Cassandra or Charlotte to death. It's something harder to explain: a living absence, a father's guilt, a son's silence. And through it all, Brosnan has chosen grace over bitterness, rarely speaking publicly about the situation out of respect, but never denying the ache. There's a quiet tension in his life between what he's built and what he's lost. He's a beloved father, a respected actor, a husband adored by millions. But there are shadows in the background. And unlike the villains in Bond films, these demons don't wear faces. They come as memories, regrets, unanswered phone calls. Even as he raises his younger sons, Dylan and Paris, who have grown into creative, grounded young men, there's always the ghost of what went wrong before. Brosnan is incredibly close with them and has said that fatherhood is the most sacred role he's ever played. Perhaps it's his way of trying to make things right, to rewrite what he couldn't save with Christopher. What's powerful is how he continues to hold space for both joy and sorrow. He can celebrate a wedding anniversary with Keely and then, the next day, post a painting that seems drenched in grief. He is a man who walks with both hands full, one holding love, the other loss. As he once said, "You don't ever stop grieving. You just learn how to carry it better." And that's exactly what he does, every day. And in the midst of that balance, between what he cherishes and what he's lost, are the 5 women who shaped his very soul. And that's exactly where we go next. The 5 women who defined his soul. For Pierce Brosnan, love has always come with a cost, but each woman he loved helped define who he became. Cassandra Harris believed in him before anyone else. She gave him family and the dream of Bond, then left him with a promise fulfilled after her death. "She made me the man I am," he once said. Charlotte, the daughter he raised, was another piece of Cassandra. Losing her to the same cancer forged a deeper strength in him, one born from compassion, not survival. Beau St. Clair, his producing partner, brought him creative purpose. When she died of cancer too, it wasn't just personal, it was artistic grief. Keely Shea Smith, his wife, didn't ask him to move on. She simply stood by his grief. "She's my North Star," he says. And then there's Christopher, the son lost to addiction and estrangement, not gone, but distant. A quiet ache he carries still. These 5, Cassandra, Charlotte, Beau, Keely, and Christopher, are not just part of his past. They are his foundation. And that's why Brosnan continues, not just to act, but to remember, and to honor them in everything he does. The final act, living love as legacy. At 71, Pierce Brosnan is no longer chasing stardom. He's preserving something far more sacred: memory. His days are spent painting, parenting, remembering. On social media, he posts quiet tributes. For Cassandra, always. In interviews, he says, "Being a father is my greatest role." That role now includes guiding Dylan and Paris and honoring the ones he lost. His art is deeply personal. His paintings, he says, are conversations with Cassandra. She's there, guiding my hand. It's grief, transformed. He doesn't run from the past. He speaks the names, Cassandra, Charlotte, Beau, and keeps their stories alive. Bond made him famous, but love and loss made him human. Now, his life is about legacy, not in box office numbers, but in quiet acts of remembrance. He's a man who doesn't hide his scars. He wears them like armor. You don't get over it. You just learn to live with it. And in that living, you honor the ones you've lost. That's not the end. It's the legacy. These 5 women weren't just part of Pierce Brosnan's past. They became the map of his soul. Through love, through grief, through legacy, they helped define the man we still admire today. Because behind the Bond, behind the fame, lies a story written not in scripts, but in love that lasts forever.